Well, here we are. We're in the endgame now. Nintendo has made it official that they will be at least revealing the new console within a year. The newest era of Nintendo is upon us, and I, for one, can't wait. I can't wait to see what the next Mario Kart, Smash, 3D Mario, Animal Crossing, and so on have to offer. I can't wait to see what obscure or underused franchises will get new entries or remakes. The future seems so exciting to me as a Nintendo fan, and as often happens, I tend to start theorising, and by the end of it, whoops, I've tried to predict what game would release every month for a console that hasn't even been revealed yet. Normal things. Back in 2018, I had a stab at predicting the Switch's entire lineup month by month, mostly just for fun, and then in 2022, I returned to that prediction in a video that 30 people watched. That's kind of par for the course. I didn't expect many people to watch it, and I mostly did it because I enjoyed talking about the things I predicted. Maybe that should have been a sign that it just wasn't that popular an idea, and that I should stick to making videos about Smash or Mario Kart or maths. Nope. I decided to do the exact same thing again, but for the Switch 2 this time, or whatever they end up calling it. The big difference here is that when I did my original Switch prediction, the console had been out for the better part of a year. This time, I wanted to do it before we even got an announcement of what the console is, because I know that as soon as it's revealed, there will be games announced, and I want to be able to predict every first-party game that's on the Switch 2. I also made this list pretty soon after the last Direct, and finalised it after EMEO was fully revealed. That way I could have full perspective on what is on the Switch, and therefore be able to predict what's on the next console. I decided this time to actually have a game in every single month. This isn't even because I think that we'll get a game every month, but I'm fairly sure that if you include all first-party releases, even the smaller ones, you actually have more games than there were months the Switch was available. So here's what I've predicted. My prediction starts with the idea that the next console will release in March. They've said that they'll give more information within the fiscal year, so before March, but I don't think that that means that they'll announce it in March. Instead, I think they'll announce it in early 2025 for a March release. This might seem like a super short period, but I believe Nintendo has said they want a shorter reveal to release cycle than they did for the Switch. Granted, the Switch already had a pretty short reveal cycle, being revealed in October for a March release, but I think they're going to want to reveal it and then strike while the iron's super hot. A March release also worked really well for the Switch, so I think they'll try that again. So March it is. What will it release with? Well, not Metroid Prime 4. A lot of people are speculating a dual release, but that doesn't make much sense to me. Think about it this way. The Switch 2 is practically confirmed to be using the Switch's account system, which would include the eShop. Metroid Prime 4 is confirmed to be on the Switch, but what's the point of also releasing it on the Switch 2? The game will already be available on Switch 2 via the eShop because it's on the Switch, and given how the base Switch version looks already, I kinda doubt they have any reason to make a separate version for the next console. Same thing kinda applies to Legend ZA, which you also won't see on this list. The Switch 2 does indeed have games though, and the first is going to be a new 3D Mario. 3D Mario has had very little going on since Bowser's Fury, so the timescale kinda lines up, and having a massive game available for launch is pretty important. I also think we might see a Xenoblade Warriors game. Warriors has already taken on Zelda and Fire Emblem, and has been pretty successful with it, so I could absolutely see them taking on Nintendo's other swordy RPG for a Warriors game. And given the last Warriors game was a while ago, it's not unfeasible it was being saved for the next console. There would be some other smaller games. Big Brain Academy seems like a good guess for a more casual friendly game, and I also figured at least one remaster would be there, so my guess is Chibi Robo would get remastered. Sure, the franchise hasn't been seen since the 3DS spin-off killed it, but does anyone actually believe we won't see the franchise again in some form? This seems like a good way to do it. I am aware that the game Ko-Robo has just been announced and was made by a lot of the same developers as Chibi Robo, but I don't necessarily think that that means we won't get a Chibi Robo game. In April, we would have a new Miitopia game, and this isn't just my bias talking, but Miitopia has a pretty strong fanbase, and I could see Nintendo giving the series another go. In May, we would have remasters of the Twilight Princess and Wind Waker remakes that people will not shut up about. Then June will be accompanied by Mario Golf, Mario sports games aren't going anywhere, and both tennis and golf seem to be treated as the mainstays now. And given tennis was the one they released early on the Switch, I think there's a chance they might reverse the order this time round. July would see a new IP take the stage. I have a few of these scattered throughout the prediction, and I don't have any specifics on what exactly they would be, or whether they would be big new IPs or smaller ones. I do think we're going to get a few though. Then would be a Picross game. I don't think they're going to go as crazy with Picross games as they did on the Switch. Maybe they'll make the Picross games more unique this time, but I would expect one early in the console's life. We haven't seen 2D Kirby, or heck, any mainline Kirby, for a while now, and I would guess that the next console's release would be the prime time for the next 2D game. Then we get to one of my biggest swings here. Another expansion to NSO. Now, there are many ways they could handle this, but in my personal opinion, I think there will be consoles added to the Switch Online service that are exclusive to the new console. This would be another good way of being able to push the new console, as it wouldn't require a separate subscription, but you would get additional benefits from having the new console. Another big part of this prediction is actually about the idea of a second screen being usable for the new console. My idea would be that you would be able to use either a second Switch 2 or a regular Switch as a second screen, with the second screen mostly just streaming the images. This would be important to the next NSO consoles, the DS and 3DS, with the DS being part of the base subscription and the 3DS being part of the expansion. And as I said, these would not be available on the Switch itself. It would be an exclusive Switch 2 perk. That would be released in October, and in November we would get a new Nintendo World Championship game. I know this seems like a really short period from when the NES version is releasing, but I can't imagine the game would take that long to develop, and it would still be little less than a year and a half. This one would be based on SNES games. I do feel this will become a series due to the fact that the current one is being called the NES edition, implying there will be other editions later. Finally, the December game would be a new Animal Crossing. Seriously, Animal Crossing has become insanely big, and seeing as New Horizons was a good 4 years ago now, 5 by next year, I can only imagine the next one is ready to drop, and it would be an excellent choice for a first year holiday release. This is how the Switch 2 would maintain its momentum. On to 2026, and January is usually a very low-key month, so I think they'd probably have a new IP for then, probably something smaller. In February, a remaster of Xenoblade Chronicles X would be released, meaning all games in the Xenoblade franchise would finally be on one system. Then we would have a new Push Mode game, a series that has some legs as a smaller eShop title, and then some sort of Mario spin-off, a completely new one, so not party, sport, car, or an RPG. Yoshi got a new game fairly early in the Switch's life, and then nothing after that, so I think 2026 will be when it returns. And then we'd get a Hotel Dusk remake. With another code getting remade, Hotel Dusk seems like an absolute perfect next candidate for this treatment. July would bring about a franchise I genuinely cannot believe hasn't been brought to Switch, Nintendogs. I know Nintendogs and Cats didn't do that well, but given the other uber casual games like Big Brain Academy, Wii Sports, Clubhouse Games and Brain Training all got entries on the Switch, it feels weird that Nintendogs, as big a phenomenon as it was back in the day, was passed up. Well, I can't see that happening again on Switch 2. Next would be a new Mario and Rabbids game, something I initially wasn't sure about, but thinking about it, I actually don't see why a pretty popular series wouldn't get another game. Then would be the triumphant return of the Donkey Kong Country series, probably with K. Rool back as the lead villain, and a new Pilot Wings game. Pilot Wings has never been massive, but I could absolutely see them making a new game. November would bring the new entry in the Paper Mario series, and inevitably, December's game would be Generation 10 of Pokemon. I think 4 years between new generations is the maximum they're going to be willing to wait, and with ZA releasing the previous year, my guess is that Gen 10 would be right around the corner. 2027 would start off with a remaster of Tomodachi Life, another game similar to Miitopia that many people would love to see. And then I'm going to throw out there the possibility of a Splatoon spin-off. Mario, Pokemon, Animal Crossing, Zelda, most of Nintendo's big franchises have spin-offs, and Splatoon, being newer, is the most obvious exception. But given it would be 12 years old by that point, getting its first spin-off seems fairly likely. In March we would get a new Mystery Dungeon game. I do find it surprising that they didn't follow up on the remake with a new game, but maybe they were just waiting. Then comes April, and finally it's time for Mario Kart. I know a lot of people are going to be confused as to why I've waited so long to add this, but given that Tour and 8 Deluxe were both still being actively developed as late as last year, I can't imagine they got much done on the next game. Some, sure, but I think it would need to cook for a few more years, and April 2027 seems like a good time for it. Next would be a remaster of Kid Icarus. It'll happen eventually, and with the next console having the ability to use a second screen, in my opinion, I would imagine 3DS remasters will become even more prevalent. Then another Mario sports game, Mario Baseball. We got Strikers on Switch, but I actually don't think we're going to get another one on Switch too. And instead, I think that for each of their consoles, they'll always have golf and tennis, and then maybe one more unusual one, and in this case, baseball would be that. July would bring a new Fire Emblem game. This feels like a pretty good timescale, right? And then another Nintendo World Championship game, this time focusing on the Game Boy. Yeah, brace ourselves, there's going to be a lot of these. For September, we would get a new WarioWare, and then I wanted a Kirby remaster, and one of the 3DS games seemed like it could take that role, so I figured Planet Robobot might get that level of love. November would have a new Mario Party, as Jamboree would have been a fair amount of time ago at that point. And then we bookend the year with Splatoon releases, with Splatoon 4 releasing in December. I know I said January is usually a fairly low-key month, so releasing a big seller would not be wise, but I also think Ring Fit Adventure being released in January, when people are wanting to get fit, would be a perfect marketing strategy, and given how big the original was, I can't imagine they won't return to it. Then we would get a new Famicom Detective Club, a series Nintendo seems like they want to push more now, as evidenced by the Smiling Man. I think they'll hit March with a non-traditional Kirby. By that I mean a Kirby game without copy abilities. Think Kirby's Epic Yarn, Rainbow Paintbrush, Mass Attack and the like. After this we would get a new F-Zero game. F-Zero 99 shows that they are at least thinking about F-Zero, and I think that will only lead to the franchise getting something in the future, although as we're in 2028 now, I would start to call it the near future. There would be a new Xenoblade game in May, and then we would get another 2 consoles added to the Switch Online service, this time GameCube and Wii. A lot of people think that this won't happen due to the fact that the games can be remastered, but those remasters and remakes aren't the original forms of the games, and they've already shown that they are perfectly okay with remakes and remasters of games being available on Switch, while the original is as well. The GameCube would be available on the base tier of NSO, and the Wii on the expansion pass. Next, also possible due to the idea of a second screen being used, would be a remaster of Nintendo Land, the game that would otherwise be completely impossible to re-release. For August, I think they'll do a remake collection of all 3 Golden Sun games and follow that in September with some sort of new IP. Then October would bring a new Star Fox game. I know a lot of people are fairly sure this is pie in the sky thinking, but it really isn't. Star Fox is one of Nintendo's most iconic classic franchises, and I doubt they'll leave it dormant forever. It missed the Switch, but got 2 games in the previous generation. 3 technically if you count Star Fox 2, so I can see it making a return. After Gen 10's DLC the previous year, I think we could see Black and White remakes in November, and then finally a new 3D Zelda. It always feels too early for a 3D Zelda, but at this point it would have been 5 years since Tears of the Kingdom, so it is absolutely possible. Spoilers, but we've actually hit the halfway point of the Switch 2's life here, and 2029 would start off with a Kirby spin-off of some kind. Then we'd have a new entry in the Wii Sports series, and a new 2D Mario. One that has done pretty well, so I feel like the era of New Super Mario Bros. Is officially over, and we'll be getting more unique 2D games for Mario in the future. Then we'd get a new Metroid Prime. I know Prime 4 took a long time to develop, but I kinda doubt Prime 5 will go through a similar development, and will release in a more timely manner. Oh, and if you're wondering, 2 and 3 would get remasters, but those would be regular Switch games released a bit before Prime 4. At least I hope so. Next would be Rhythm Paradise, the franchise I don't think anyone can believe Nintendo has ignored, but I also think it's feasible that they were just wanting to focus on WarioWare, as I believe they're developed by the same team. And then in June, we would get Mario Tennis. This might be a bit of a weird one, but I could see a July release of a Johto version of Pokemon Let's Go. I don't think it will be a dead sub-series, and I think there's a chance it will be developed by a side team, not the main Game Freak team, hence a non-holiday release date. Then we would get another Mario Party, maybe a Super Mario Party this time because they seem to treat them as separate for some reason. And then the thing I can't believe no one is clamouring for, an Ocarina of Time remake. Considered the greatest game of all time, and yet no one clamours for a remake, and that's weird to me, but I think it will happen. And while we're on the subject of remakes, if Thousand Year Door can get one, I absolutely believe that Super Paper Mario can as well. A remaster of Yoshi's Woolly World would be the November game, and then finally, Smash. I've put it this late for two reasons. Firstly, I don't think they've been working on it at all, even now. Sakurai's not available, and I think they're going to want to wait to see whether or not he'd come back to develop for the next one before they start work on it. And there really isn't any rush. I've always speculated that the reason the booster course pass for Mario Kart 8 started when it did was because it wouldn't be overlapping at all with Smash's DLC. Both of those games and their DLC cycles are extremely dominating in terms of discussion and discourse, and I think they'll want to maximise speculation and social media engagement by not having them getting content and reveals at the same time. So the idea is that Mario Kart would release, its DLC cycle would end, and then they'd announce a new Smash game, which would get its own DLC cycle. It feels like a perfect way to pace it, honestly. The new decade would be ushered in by a new style-savvy game, because why the heck not? Then there would be a new IP before March gives us a new Mario and Luigi game, seeing as that series seems to be back. It's been a minute, but a GBA edition of Nintendo World Championship would be in April, and then a Pokemon Conquest remake in May. And given ARMS is developed by the same team behind Mario Kart, with that game and its DLC in the rearview mirror, I can absolutely see an ARMS game coming that June. In July we'd get a completely new 2D Zelda game, something they're clearly happy to do if Echoes of Wisdom is anything to go by. We'd get a new Mario Maker in August, including both Wonder and the newer game as Styles, and a new Bayonetta game in September. October would bring with it Pikmin. November is a remake of 3D Land, probably the 3D game which needs it the most just to make people actually see it. And the year would be rounded out with Generation 11 of Pokemon. This would be another 4-year gap, which might seem weird to do again, but I think it's more than possible. They don't have to stick to a 3-year cycle anymore. 2031 would be the Switch 2's 2024, but as the Switch has shown, that doesn't mean it has to slow down. There would be another Picross game, this time a Picross 3D game, and a remake of Link to the Past. If Link's Awakening can get one, Link to the Past certainly can. Then we'd get a new Luigi's Mansion game, maybe a little bit late, but there isn't really any rush. April would bring a new Fire Emblem game, and then remakes of Pokemon Colosseum and XD would be in May. That might seem odd, but I could absolutely see them revisiting many of their spin-offs, hence why both this and Conquest are in this prediction. There'd be a new IP in June, and then a new 3D Mario. We didn't get a full second 3D Mario on Switch, but we did get Bowser's Fury, so getting two new 3D Mario games on one console isn't anywhere near to being outside the realms of possibility. Then I could see a new Fossil Fighters game being released in August. If Endless Ocean can get a sequel, so can Fossil Fighters. Coming into the last year, I think you'd see some more experimental stuff, so I say we might get another new IP, and then a new 3D Kirby game to follow up on Forgotten Land. The console would get its last new Xenoblade game in November, and a new Wario Land game for December. Wario Land has to return at some point, right? And then we'd come to 2032. The new console would be announced by then, and released in March, but the Switch 2 would still have a couple of tricks up its sleeve. Debuting almost 15 years after the original, Sushi Strikers would get a new game, and then in the month before the Switch 3 releases, a Hey Pikmin remaster would be released. I mostly just find the idea of one of Nintendo's most hated games getting a remaster just before a new console releases so that it will just end up dying hilarious. You'd no longer see a new game every month, but there would be some sort of smaller new IP releasing in May, and a new Box Boy game for July. The last Nintendo World Championship game for Switch 2 would be the N64 edition, and would release in October, and finally, as is tradition, Pokemon would be the last one on the ship as it sinks, with them releasing a Gen 8 Legends game. I chose Gen 8 because it has more history to it than most other regions, and also because I thought of the name Pokemon Legends Armory, and frankly, I think that goes hard. And that's it. My entire prediction for the Switch 2's life. Is this going to be accurate? Nope. Even just having a game every month probably isn't likely to happen, and there's some things here that are kinda off the wall, or things I've put much earlier than is possible, or much later than is reasonable. But I still enjoyed making this list, and if I'm honest, knowing that we can never know what they'll do, and we can never predict their next move is more exciting. After all, that just means that at every turn we can and will be taken by surprise. That's the Nintendo magic after all. This was just a bit of fun that I'd love to be able to follow up on someday, just like I did for the last one. Who knows, that video might end up getting a whole 31 views.